Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Question Time with myself, Harry Knight. Once again, I'm going to be going through a few of your questions that you've left for me in the comments under some of our previous videos. First question this episode comes from Alberto Tay, who wanted to know what the difference is between a fish and a groveler. Okay, these are two terms that are applied to surfboards, and quite often they're used interchangeably, which I don't know is always entirely correct. So it's a really good question for us to have a bit of a discussion about. Now, fish, the term fish goes back to a board that was designed at the end of the 60s, about 1967. Steve List designed a board that looked a little bit like this, although I am not a particularly good drawer. Okay, so kind of short and fat, rounded nose, very deep swallowtail, not quite as wide as that, but basically it kind of looked a little bit like a kid's drawing of a fish. They got called that, the name stuck. The board was actually designed, Steve List was a kneeboarder, and this kind of wide swallowtail was so he could prop his lower leg and the swim fins up on the tail of the board and they wouldn't drag in the water. A couple of stand-up surfers got hold of these and they started riding them, and in particular they started riding them in smaller, softer waves because they found that the design worked really well for generating speed. In 1972, I think, the World Championships first and second place went to guys riding these fish boards in some pretty lackluster waves at Huntington Beach. So that was where the fish's reputation as a small wave board kind of got cemented. But interestingly, originally Steve List designed it for riding some pretty punchy, hollow, barreling waves. And more recently, there have been a lot of guys taking boards with this sort of shape out in big barreling waves and really finding that it works really well. We've got a really good article actually on our website that Harrison Roach wrote for us about how fish design boards can actually be really, really good in big, powerful waves. So if anyone fancies reading that, I shall stick a link down below. So that's our fish. Now, groveler is a term that's applied to any board that's used for kind of performance surfing in small waves. I guess the term is probably a more recent one, but this has been a problem since the shortboard revolution at the end of the 60s, and particularly once the kind of teardrop shaped single fins, the Brewer lightning bolt style boards became the default performance board. Those boards really didn't work in small waves, and there was this whole kind of design quest for boards that would work in small waves. And we got, the IPA Stings, the Mark Richards twin fin, the Simon Anderson thruster, all in this quest to create a board that would actually work in small waves. Obviously the Simon Anderson thruster became famous because it kind of worked better in big waves as well. But the term groveler kind of came about, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s. Where again we kind of end up in a situation where the default boards that the pro level riders were using weren't really very applicable for most surfers in normal everyday waves, and again there was this push to find boards that would work, which interestingly again was kind of led by a fish. Lost put a video out in 97, I think, 5.5 by 19 and a quarter, where they had some of their team riders riding a board. They call it the round-nosed fish. It had a more pulled-in tail, but still a swallowtail. It was a shallower swallowtail. But riding that board in some pretty big surf in Hawaii and stuff like that. It was a great little video, but it kind of started a push for these kind of shorter, wider boards. And because one of the most famous boards of that time was a fish, the term fish and the term groveler kind of ended up getting mixed about. But I think really any board that you're applying the term fish to should have some of this DNA. You'd want to see, swallowtail, maybe twin finned, shorter, fatter outline, that sort of stuff going on. Whereas a groveler can have a lot of differences. A lot of groveler boards are just kind of short, fat shortboards with rounded tails or squash tails on them. So There's probably a little Venn diagram with a little bit of overlap, but not all fish are Grovelers, because some of them are designed to work well in big waves, and not all Grovelers are fish because they just don't really have very much DNA from this design in them. They're just scaled down, Simon Anderson thrusters. So hopefully that's helpful. As with so much of surf terminology, no one ever really stopped to define what it meant, and the way that we use different terminology has evolved differently in different parts of the world. So you will definitely hear groveler and fish used interchangeably, but that I guess is my opinion on how they should be used. So yeah, hopefully that was interesting. Right, next question. All right, our next question comes from Herman Llorens, or German Llorens. I'm not sure whether you pronounce the G or not, but he was asking whether there is a golden rule for the number of waves in a set based on the period and the size of the swell. This is a great question. I think as soon as you start surfing, you start hearing these sort of folklore things like there's always 7 waves in a set, or the third wave is always biggest, things like that. And actually, you'll also hear people saying the opposite, oh, it's all chaos theory, you can't predict what the waves are going to do. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I'm going to preface this by saying there's a really, really good article by Tony Butt on magic seaweed that I will link to down below. But also Will was talking about this recently in one of his Surfing Explained episodes. So I'll put a link to that as well. But basically, sets are created when you have 2 overlapping wavelengths. So if I get my pens out here. So let's say we've got, as waves travel across the ocean, the bigger, longer period waves with the bigger circles of energy, they travel faster than smaller period waves. So what you end up with is called wave trains, groups of waves traveling together that are all about the same size. They're all traveling at about the same speed. So as they do that, the bigger ones travel faster than the smaller ones, and they end up kind of overlapping a little bit. So let's say we've got one wave train in the water that looks a little bit like this. Okay, and that's traveling across the ocean. And there's another wave train as well. This is maybe our, 15-second period. And let's say we've got another one going across that looks like this. And this is our shorter period swell that I'm not drawing very well. But what you'll find is that there are places where the peaks of the waves and the troughs of the waves kind of line up quite nicely. And what happens then is what's called constructive interference, which is where the energy of the peaks and the troughs combine together, and we actually end up with bigger waves at this point. This would be where we would see a set of bigger waves forming. Now, what we also get is what's called destructive interference. Okay. Now, destructive interference is where the peak of one wave lines up with the trough of another wave, and they basically cancel each other out. It's kind of like noise cancelling headphones. So this would end up being a lull with actually no, the movement of the water on the surface would kind of be cancelled out, and there really wouldn't be any up and down movement at all. So that's how sets are created. Now, what it means is that, yeah, there is actually a rule to this. We have, if we know what wave trains are in the ocean, what all the energy is, we could calculate how many waves there would be in a set. If these two periods are quite close together, let's say we had a 15 seconds and 16 second period, then the overlap would be quite extended and you get quite a lot of waves in a set, maybe 5, 6, 7 waves in a set. If these two periods are very different, if we had a 16 seconds and 8 seconds, then the overlap won't be very much. And so we'll just get like 1 or 2 waves in a set and shorter lulls as well. The problem is that the ocean is never as simple as the nice diagrams that we use in textbooks. And, there will always be multiple swells in the ocean, and there are going to be multiple wave trains of different periods coming out of each swell. And the way that they overlap and interfere with each other is going to be very, very difficult to really calculate accurately. So No, there isn't like a solid rule that you can say as to how many waves will be in a set or which wave will be the biggest. But what is genuinely worth doing is, when you get to the beach, you're taking your board out the car, waxing it up, putting a wetsuit on, doing a little warm up, watch the waves and see if you can detect any kind of pattern in the waves. Are there, because there will be probably a little bit of a pattern, are there 7, 8, 9 waves in a set, or are there 2, 3 waves in a set? We can't say for sure how many there'll be, but that kind of scale we might be able to pick out. Are there long gaps between the sets arriving on the beach, or is there a set, every 2 or 3 minutes? That stuff you may very well be able to pick out on a lot of days, and particularly for competitive surfing, if you're surfing heats, that information is something that you can use to start building a little bit of a tactic as to which waves you're going to catch, how you're going to surf that heat. But for even those of us that aren't surfing competitively, just having that information in our head before we paddle out is useful. Not that you want to kind of bet your house on that information, but a lot of days, particularly if you've got clean groundswell, you probably will be able to pick out some sort of pattern, but it will be different, and it'll even be different at different beaches, because of the way that the swell interacts with the coastline. The way that the different periods overlap will be different in different parts of the country and different beaches that face in different directions. So you just kind of have to sit and watch the beach that you're going to surf and see if you can identify any rhythm. And there will be days where that rhythm is so chaotic that you just won't really be able to pick it out. It is there. It is hidden away in the mathematics, but it's not really discernible to us sitting there watching it for 10 minutes. But yeah, cool. Again, I hope that was interesting for you guys. I hope that kind of answered questions that maybe some of you had in your heads. Again, as always, please put any questions, comments, feedback, throw it in down below, because that's kind of how I put this together. Without your questions, I don't have anything to talk about. For now, from me, take care, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.